It's so good to see each and every one of you tonight. Tonight I want us to talk about something that we've all had to deal with and we're all going to continue to deal with, and that is conflict. You have had conflict with your spouses. Well, if you're married, you've had conflict with your spouses. You've had conflict with your children. You've had conflict with your parents. You've had conflict with your coworkers. You've had conflict with your bosses, with your employees. We've all had to deal with conflict from nearly every person that we've ever interacted with in our entire lives, because conflict is just everywhere about us. The nature of the Bible has to deal with conflict. The conflict of man with sin. The conflict between man and Satan. The conflict between God and man. The conflict between good and evil. Conflict is all about us. We live in a world that is full of conflict. Conflict from certain individuals. Conflict between groups. Conflict between political parties. As you can see, we live in a world where conflict is absolutely everywhere. Conflict is not always a bad thing either. You're going to face conflict in various ways throughout your life, but the question is, how are you going to face that conflict? You and I have a conflict with sin, but if we rely on Christ and overcome that conflict, we are victors. On the other hand, if we have a conflict with sin and we allow ourselves to be lured away by the passions of the world and lose that conflict, and spend eternity separated from God in hell, then that conflict has damned our soul. So it's important for us to realize how we can deal with conflict each and every day. Jesus talked about that in Matthew chapter 18. He talked about conflict between people in the assembly. He said, if you know there's conflict between you and someone else, leave your altar, go to that individual, and try to make recommendations. If that person will not listen to you, go and get 2 witnesses. If they won't listen to you, go and get the elders and take it to them. And if they still won't listen to you, let them be accursed. But tonight I want us to look at the book of Proverbs. Proverbs is well known as being a book of proverbial wisdom, being a book that we can turn to for practical guidance, how we can overcome a variety of objects. And tonight I want us to look at 10 passages in the book of Proverbs that tell us how we can overcome conflict in our daily lives. As I said before, conflict is going to come, but how are you and I going to face that conflict? The first thing that we can learn from the book of Proverbs is that avoiding conflict altogether can be a huge tool in our arsenal. In Proverbs chapter 20, verse 3, it says, "It is an honor for a man to keep aloof from strife, but every fool will be quarreling." You've known those people who will fight at the drop of a hat, and sometimes they throw their own hat. They just seem like they're always running around looking for the next conflict, almost like they feed off of it. It's where they get their energy from. As Christians, we can't be those type of people. We don't need to be people that go out looking for conflict. We don't need to be people who are easily offended. If you are easily offended, that's looking for conflict. Conflict doesn't mean it has to be some long, drawn-out physical battle. It means that you're wanting that conflict, that air between you and someone else. As Christians, we shouldn't be like that. If you're married, well, maybe I shouldn't put you in the same boat as myself. But sometimes with me, being a married man, I'll tell Brittany all the time, if I say something and it upsets you, I didn't mean it like that. Whatever it was, whatever you hear, if there's a good way to take something and a bad way to take something, always take the good way, right? Because I didn't mean it in that type of way, right? And so, are there any husbands like that with me? No? I see how it is. See, I just had conflict with every man in this building that's married. See, but some people, and I'm saying Brittany is, but I'm saying some people can be so easily offended, right? If there's a certain way to take something, don't go around looking for a conflict. Let those things roll off your back. I was in the Bible office at Freed-Hardeman one time, and I walked in, and I was talking to some of the professors, and I was walking out, and one of the guys in that room that was a student looked out and said, "That guy's so fake." Brittany was a secretary at the time in the Bible office, and he didn't know we were married. And so Brittany told me what he had said, and I said, he was probably talking about somebody else. And she said, "Oh, no. He was talking about you." I said, maybe he was having a bad day. I don't know. And but you just gotta let things roll off your back. Just you can't go around looking for conflict. Just let it go off your back. The second thing the book of Proverbs tells us that we can do to overcome this conflict is be at peace with God. It says, when a man's way pleases the Lord, he makes even his enemies to be at peace with him. If we are more concerned about living our lives in a peaceful way with the Lord, it's going to show in every relationship that we have. We're going to be kinder listeners. We're going to be more benevolent when it comes to other people's opinions, even if they're wrong. We're going to be nicer to those people who maybe had a bad day. I was listening to Peyton talk about it just the other day. We were talking, and he was talking about he tries to not be animated in traffic when somebody cuts him off or speeds past him or passes on the right-hand side, because he said, well, you never know. They could be rushing to the hospital. They could be having a bad day. Somebody could be sick. They just could have got an emergency call, right? And so, that's something I've got to work on myself, because I'm pretty easygoing unless I'm in traffic. And the gloves come off, right? The kid in the Bible office, nothing, right? You put me on Interstate 65 at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. It's, is that the preacher? It's not that bad, but I could do better. But when our way pleases the Lord, we're going to be at peace with other people. We're going to look for ways to go out and serve them any way that we can. Try to diffuse that conflict, not try to feed on those situations, because we're trying to live our life as a reflection of Christ. And if that is our main goal, then we're going to be at peace with the people. Yes, conflicts will arise no matter who you are, but it's how you handle those conflicts that make the difference. The third thing the book of Proverbs says is that we are responsible for our tempers. Chapter 16, verse 32 says, whoever is slow to anger is better than the mighty, and he who rules his spirit than he who takes a city. We've got to be in charge of our own emotions. As an adult, as an individual, as a Christian, we have got to be in charge of our emotions. So many people fly off at the handle for any reason under the sun. We can't be like that. We've got to be slow to wrath, slow to anger. We've got to be people who have been redeemed, people who are righteous. Now, did Jesus get upset? Yes, he turned the money changers' tables over, and he braided a cord and ran them out of the temple. But was Jesus long-suffering? Absolutely. There were so many times where the text says that Jesus was literally exhausted in the Greek, and they would go away to a quiet place, and the time they got there, people once again surrounded them, bringing them their sick, and wanted them to touch their children and to teach them. And Jesus was long-suffering, and what he did was what they needed at that time. We got to take our tempers and our emotions and be able to control those in any situation that we have. It comes with practice. Your self-control over your emotions is a muscle. When I had ACL surgery, and if any of you ever had surgery, you've been in the same situation. When they took that cast off my leg where the nerve block had been after a few days, I was a pretty stout individual. I could squat a lot for somebody in high school. I kid you not, my leg looked like my arm. All the muscles just absolutely atrophied and just went away. And it took almost 2 years to get that strength back, because I had lost all that muscle in just a week's time, 2 weeks' time, and then, of course, over 6 or 9 months of rehab. But our emotions, if we allow ourselves to fly off at the handle any and every time, it's going to become harder and harder for us to control our emotions. But if we will take the first step in controlling our emotions, taking a deep breath, taking a step back, over time, you're going to see yourself be able to contain your emotions so much more. And you think, man, how could Job have so much patience when he loses everything? Well, it's probably because Job had been working on patience his entire life. He probably didn't wake up that morning with his children, all 7 of them being killed, and all of his livestock being taken away, and think, you know what? Today's probably a good day to start being patient and long-suffering. Probably conditioned himself for that moment. We've got to be the same way. We've got to condition ourselves for the hard times in life by being patient and long-suffering, even in the good times. The fourth thing the book of Proverbs says that we can manage conflict with is in the early stages. Chapter 17, verse 14 says, the beginning of strife is like letting out water, so quit before the quarrel breaks out. There's a reason why Jesus says the very instant you remember that somebody has a problem with you, put your gift aside, leave the altar, and go straight to them. You all know of situations in the past, or maybe even in your own life, where somebody took a statement the wrong way. Maybe a way you didn't intend, or a way somebody else didn't intend. And there were rifts for decades, maybe even a lifetime, over a misunderstanding that could have simply been resolved. If they'd have just went to that person and said, look, this isn't what I meant. I know of a situation where two preachers didn't talk for 30 years. Two preachers. Because one said something jokingly about the other one. Somebody went and told that preacher. He got upset and didn't go to the other one. Apparently he hadn't preached too many sermons on Matthew 19, right? Matthew 18. But we've got to be sure we keep our emotions in check. And if we do feel like we have conflict with an individual, just go to that person. Get it off your chest. Seek them out, because it's so much easier to reconcile that conflict in the early stages than it is years and decades later, when even more emotions have been tied into those situations. The fifth thing the book of Proverbs in its wisdom tells us is to listen to all sides and don't decide too early. A lot of times we get caught up in other people's conflict. The Bible says the one who states his case first seems right until the other comes and examines him. The problem with conflict is that it rarely stays between two individuals. It oftentimes branches out. Just like me and that young man in the Bible office, we had a conflict. He thought negatively of me. It didn't affect me any. I didn't care. But Brittany was pretty upset, right? If roles had been reversed and somebody said it about Brittany, I might have cared more than if somebody said it about myself. That's the way conflict works. It doesn't just contain you and that other individual. It brings other people into the equation. Think about conflict between spouses, especially if there are children in the home. If that conflict is not reconciled, if that is not taken care of immediately, the children suffer because of it. Oftentimes, you see when people have conflicts within families, other family members are forced to take sides over who they think is in the right. You see, we've got to be careful not to be sucked into other people's conflicts. And if we do find ourselves in conflicts with other individuals, to take a step back and be as objective as we can. A lady was talking to me one time about my great-grandmother, and she was married to one of her sons. And she said, I always loved your great-grandmother because I knew if me and so-and-so were having a fight, she would take my side because I was right. Now, you may have in-laws like that, and you may have in-laws that are going to take your spouse's side no matter what they do. Right? But if you had in-laws that were going to look at the situation objectively and say, you know what, I'm on their side because they're in the right, wouldn't that mean something to you? Of course it would. Be that person. Be objective. Don't be blinded by family relations. Don't be blinded by personal relationships that you have. Be as objective as you can when you find yourself in the midst of other people's conflicts, because then you can try to offer them some sort of help. But if you allow yourselves to be told with by people's emotions, you'll find yourself in the midst of conflict, and not in a healthy way, and not in a productive way. The sixth thing the book of Proverbs tells us that is profitable when it comes to conflict is a third party, someone who is completely objective. Chapter 18, verse 18, the very next verse says, the lot puts an end to quarrels and decides between powerful contenders. You'll see this oftentimes in the political sphere. You'll see that the United States has brokered a treaty between Israel and, I don't know, Turkey, fill in the blank, right? Russia has mediated a treaty between Iran and Syria. Fill in the blank. You'll see an objective third party come in. A lot of times that's what we do with our legal system, do we not? You go before the judge, and the judge is supposed to be completely objective in his decision. He is an objective, non-committed third party to the situation. His only commitment is to the upholding of the law. In fact, if you go in for jury duty, one of the things they will ask you, do you know any of these two parties involved? And if you say yes, you ain't on jury duty, right? And so that's important because you've got to be objective. If you find that somebody that you are in a conflict with and you are having a hard time reaching them, try to find an objective third party. Maybe somebody that they know and respect. Maybe it's an elder. Maybe it's a preacher. Maybe it's a family member. Maybe it's a coworker. Maybe it's somebody that you don't even know, but they really respect that you know is an objective person who's going to be beneficial to taking that conflict and resolving it in a positive way. Sometimes you can't resolve a conflict with someone else because there's just too much emotional baggage attached. Look for that third party that can step in. That's what the church is supposed to be. When Jesus talks about Matthew 18, when he says, go to the people in the church, taking 2 witnesses and then the elders, they're supposed to be completely objective to the situation. So if you find yourself at conflict with someone in this congregation, and if you stay in the church your entire life, which is what I pray, you're going to have conflict with somebody in this building. They're going to say something and you're going to take it the wrong way, or you're going to say something, they're going to take it the wrong way. You're going to say, man, he was really short with me last time I talked to him. I don't know if I did something to offend him. If you stay in the church your entire life, you will find some sort of conflict. Be proactive. Look to resolve it in a beneficial and positive way. And if you feel like there's just too much there or they won't listen, go to an elder. Go to a friend in the congregation to help resolve that conflict. Because it's not a question of if conflict is going to come within this building, within our membership. It's going to come, but the question is, how are you going to handle that conflict? The 7th thing that we're told is that some conflicts are not worth the cost. Chapter 19, verse 11, good sense makes one slow to anger, and it is his glory to overlook an offense. Sometimes it's better just to not care. Yes, they may have wronged you. Yes, they may have offended you. Yes, they may have said something that was untrue. Yes, they may have said something that was unkind. But sometimes you need to take a step back and evaluate the situation and say, you know what? It doesn't really matter. At the end of the day, who cares? And if we'll take that approach to a lot of things, we'll find ourselves getting rid of a lot of conflict ourselves without really having to worry about the other person, because if you don't lose any sleep over what's being said or done, if it doesn't really make a difference in your day-to-day activities, is it really worth fighting about? Is it really worth being offended over? And so we've got to take a step back and say, you know, this wrath that I'm dealing with, this conflict that I'm about to engage in, is it productive? Is there a way that it can be undone? I'm just going to be honest with you. Some people you can't resolve conflict with. And you can try, and you can try, and you can try. And if you know that's the situation, then you just got to be the bigger person and say, in your mind, not out loud to other people, but that's just the way they are, and there's not really much I can do about that. And just leave it alone. And you'll find a peace come over you that you did not think was capable in that conflict situation when you decide to just not care. The 8th thing that we're told is that kindness can reduce a destructive conflict. Chapter 21, verse 14 says, a gift in secret averts anger, and a concealed bribe, strong wrath. Sometimes the best way to diffuse a conflict with someone is to give them a gift, to let them know your heart is in the right place. Husbands, if you're not sure how to resolve conflict with your spouses, this is a very good one to use. You can write this down in your notes, okay? Use the bulletin, right? If your wife is mad at you, buy her something. Candy bar, flowers, movie tickets, a new dress, a new bedroom suit. I'm just playing. That's too much. But if someone's upset with you, maybe look for a way to give them a gift and defuse the situation and say, you know what, I got this. I thought about you. Oh, by the way, while I'm giving you this nice gift, do you remember that situation the other day? Maybe we could talk about that. Now, I don't know about you, but if somebody gives me a gift, I'm a lot easier to listen. I'll give you one that's not even have to do with real strong, serious conflict. The last congregation we were at, we went door knocking, and we realized that when you knock on a stranger's door, there's conflict there. As I said before, conflict is not always negative. Conflict is just what happens when there is stress within a situation. You knock on somebody's door today, you know, it's not like it was in the 1960s. It's not put the coffee on, get the cake out, we've got company. It's kind of like, did you invite somebody over? Well, I didn't invite anybody over. Well, the blinds are open, so we got to open the door. They're not going away. And so when we knocked on doors to invite them to church, there was conflict, and it was awkward. And my wife had a great idea. She said, let's give them candy. And you may think I'm crazy for this, but we went out and we got to Sam's and bought the little individual fun-size type of candy, and we put it in a bag. We put our church card with it, with our name and our address and our service times, and we knocked on the door. And when they opened the door, the first thing we did was hand that candy. And you will not believe grown adults. They tell kids all the time, if strangers give you candy, run away. You give a 50-year-old a bag full of Three Musketeers and Milky Ways, they'll stand and listen to you for 5 minutes, and wish you Godspeed when you leave. And so diffuse conflict with a gift every once in a while. And if you want to give, the preacher elders candy, I think we're okay with that, But look for kindness to dissolve a situation. The ninth thing the book of Proverbs tells us, be slow to get in other people's conflicts. If you know two individuals are having conflict with each other, be real careful about getting in the middle of that, because you're putting yourself in a highly stressful situation. If they ask you for help, that's something different. But just don't go putting yourself in other people's conflict. Whoever meddles in a quarrel not his own is like one who takes a passing dog by the ears. Chapter 26, verse 17. If you see conflict between other individuals, don't jump in. Don't take sides. Don't even try to help if they're not asking for your help, because it's just going to put you in a situation. I've known of good-spirited people who saw two individuals in a conflict, and they tried to get in there and help them and wrestle, and before it was over, both of them had one thing in common. They were mad at the other person for trying to get in their affair and trying to help. So one of the things we can do to relieve conflict in our own lives is not put on the baggage of conflict from other people. Conflict requires energy, but it must be fed to continue. Towards the end of Proverbs in chapter 26, verses 20 to 21, it says, for the lack of wood the fire goes out, and where there is no whisperer, quarreling ceases. As charcoal to hot embers and wood to fire, so is a quarrelsome man for kindling strife. Sometimes the best way to diffuse conflict is just to simply quit heaping on more and more stress into the situation. If you and your spouse are having a conflict, the best thing might be to just shut up, right? Just remove yourself from the situation and say, baby, we need time out. We need 30-minute time out to cool down, and we'll come back and we'll start the fight back in 30 minutes. We'll start the intense discussion in 30 minutes, right? If we're still that upset about it. And if you're still really hot, maybe take another time out. You get 3, right? That was a football analogy. I'm not saying you only get 3 timeouts in marriage. But sometimes you've got to remove yourself. Just let that fire die down whenever tensions get really hot. And sometimes you come back 30 minutes later and think, man, that was stupid. We let that escalate way out of control. I'm not even really sure what the argument was even about in the first place. We're going to have conflict in our lives from all types of individuals and all types of situations. But we've got to handle that conflict the exact same way that we approach everything else in life, and that is as a Christian. It doesn't matter if we're talking to a loved one. It doesn't matter if we're dealing with someone in the congregation. It doesn't matter if it's with an elder. It doesn't matter if it's with a boss or a rebellious child. We are a Christian first and foremost, and that means the way we handle conflict is we handle conflict as a Christian, someone who has been redeemed by the blood of Christ. Because how we handle conflict is a direct reflection of our relationship with God. If we are a quarrelsome person who's going around and getting into conflicts with everybody in town, our spirituality is lacking, and we need to work on that. If we can face conflict with individuals with the love of Christ, we're maturing as Christians. And so think about how you handle conflict in your own life with your spouse and with your children and with your coworkers and with fill in the blank. That's an assessment of your spirituality, how you are growing as a Christian. And the good thing is, it's a muscle. the more you work it, the stronger it becomes. The easier it becomes to lift those conflicts in your daily life. The greatest conflict that we'll ever face, as mentioned before, is sin. A conflict that we couldn't win on our own behalf. But thanks be to God, Christ gave us the opportunity to conquer that conflict through His blood. If you're here tonight and you're not a Christian, if you've never come into contact with that blood, confess that Christ is the Son of God, repent of your sins, and put Him on in baptism. If you're here tonight and you are a Christian, how are you handling conflict in your life? Conflict with yourself, conflict with others, most importantly, your conflict over sin. And if you need help in any way, ask for prayers. Ask for the help of the congregation here at Chapel Hill to help you in whatever way that you need. But please do something about it. Don't let that conflict fester. You have to do something about it straightway and immediately. And if we can help, please let us know as we stand and as we sing.